Yeah, my name is still Norbert Hartl, and I'm still working for a company called ActiveGrid. And that will be the topic today. And yeah, I'm still not sure how it goes because the talk is about an experiment which turned out to be a really useful one. But yeah, louder? Okay. More. Yeah, it's about an experiment. I'm just was setting up, but it turned out to be a really good experiment. So it develops, and even we put it in production as soil. Well, brave enough, stupid enough. That's not the case. And I didn't know what would be the right title for the talk. So visual-driven database queries. Well, it's about two things. So we heard a lot of talks because if you use HTML, it means client-server problems having. So you won't make your backend in HTML probably. Maybe there is some nasty guy doing this. But a lot of you can tell that client-server has some obstacles. So I really enjoyed the talk of Johan, that even with Seaside, with having not completely server rendering, but making that, because you always put either the logic, so if you want to do UX these days, you put a lot of logic on the client. But if you have a lot of business logic which is complex, you try to move it to the backend. But then you always have the problem where you can have the complexity. Either you put a very thin client onto it, not having enough communication to the backend, or you do everything server-side rendering, and then it's hard to do really JavaScript or UX because the interface between server-side rendering and JavaScript is never perfect because it's just another obstacle. And the second thing, so I mean, the Gemstone guys can tell how hard it is to have a front end for their product because we are all seeing Gemstone client. So if the client is good, and here you expose a lot of the complexity to the user, but then something like latency kicks in and completely kills the usability because it's perfect object model, but it just doesn't work because the network is too slow. It's too chatty, too whatever. There's a lot of things you have to put. If you put it on the communication layer, you have problems like latency and stuff. The second subtopic of this is well, I feel like we're making something like a small business IDE, so having the same problem. You want to try to solve complex problems, but you don't want to expose these to the user. So that's one of the non-so-technical things you have to do right now, that either you do complex stuff and expose everything of the complexity to the user, or you try not to do so. And the experiment is about both. The experiment is about our product is ActiveGrid. It's now twofold. It's a visual database. I will just guide you through some of the slides or some of the screenshots to see what kind of the problems we face. It's a visual database and flow management tool. So it's about modeling small to medium-sized business problems and having with a workflow a sort of dynamic to scale a process. So the visual database part. In ActiveGrid, the visual database is just, so it's kind of an Excel view because that's the most accepted data entry UI on Earth. I think it's a square root. You can just write everything everywhere. It's just for most people use it like this. For us, every column has a type. So you can have, the screenshot shows that you press the plus button and you say, I want to add a new column. And I want to make something like a to-do list where you can track, I still need to do in progress or done. So then you make something like, it's called a single select. For us, this will be an enum. It's just saying you want to extend your model by adding another column. So when you do this, you just define it's an enum, and I say, for me, I want to have the 3 labels to do, in progress, and done. And so you define your column being a single select out of 3 values. And so the visual database is like you have even connects between the grids. So we call this a grid. That's ActiveGrid, not table grid. And you can even have references between them. So the basic model needs we have, and they're not always like really complex. It's just something like a 1-to-M relationship, custom product, shopping cart, customer, something. And ActiveGrid is therefore to ease that pain for non-developers, because the gap between knowing what your problem is and be able to do that is a big gap. And it's still, and that's, I think it's one of these low code, no code buzzwords thing is all around this. Just enables, for me, it's always a difference. You do a library, but it's not useful until someone makes that into a runtime and put the service label onto it so you can use it. So you just created your second column and then saying, okay, but this list will grow. So I'm not interested in the things that have been done already. So you add a filter and you can then select the column state that you just created and saying, I'm only interested in those that are not equal to done. So, and this is kind of the problem that I want to show to you, that it's just like a quite flexible and powerful way of describing that, and you have to communicate that to the server. You can also see there's an add filter at the bottom, so you can compose them and or more complex, and there's a lot of other things in the end you need to describe somehow to use it on the front end and on the back end. Same thing as an example for the workflow engine. So this is a tool that is supposed to be like, every one of us knows flow diagrams. So the point is about visually creating that flow chart, and then the workflow engine is done, because you configure the flow engine while doing this graphically, and if you're done, your workflow engine is ready. The combination we do between the database and the workflow form is that you usually use triggers, because the mapping your business model onto the visual database is you're interested in events like someone created a new entry in that grid or someone updated an entry in that grid, and then you want to spawn off a process working with that data. So this is, we call a trigger. On the right side you see the space is ESUG 2023, I call it, and then the event is new entry added, and the grid was the to-dos, just I showed before. So every time a new entry is put in there, this flow will be kicked off. So the flow thing, okay, we make it one level more complex, saying when there's something in the grid, there's something kicked off, but I still need to check another remote API before I do something. So let's assume I have a second process thing that I want to contact. So I've just put a JSON file on my website, which mimics a data API. And then I just choose the method get. I'm saying, okay, this is a node configuration saying now when an entry in the grid is added, the flow is kicked off and it will do an HTTP request and gets the response. And then I want to send an email when the check is right. So I can have in a workflow engine, so the branching model is like you have any kind of outputs you have, and then you have on the transition, which is the connection between two nodes, you have filters. So you put the condition passing this transition is like an if-else would be you have two outgoing arguments and just the inverse conditions on each. So you will go one or the other. But the whole model is just that you can have parallel execution. You can have 8 outgoing and all of them are fired. So it's just construct. I'm not sure if you're into these workflow description models. So there's a decent set of what you can describe: sequential, parallel. You have join nodes. All of them have to be completed. One of them have to be completed. It's kind of a bit of promises. So the actions you have on promises. When we specify a filter, we have the same thing, and it gets even more extreme, because I'm saying I want to rely the filter on whatever the HTTP request before got back. So I get something back which I don't know how it looks like. So the user that creates the node knows it, but we as a product don't know it. So here the thing is that you see on the available fields, there's 2 sections, that's the title of the nodes. So you can, in the workflow system, you can select every prior node. So if you make a long chain, you can select labels from any prior node to make your condition of. So I clicked on the state, and that's maybe the part of the title of the presentation is visual driven, because you get back HTTP and then it's just selected for you to have a label, and you either drag and drop or click it to select that in the only continue if field. When you do this, it knows a bit about the type. It's JSON basic types, but I know then there's a few options I can have, and one is equal to, because everything can be checked for is equal to. And there's another thing, I just know it's another API, and there's JSON giving me a done label in a state key. And so I'm just saying, so pass if the HTTP request returned a JSON, which has at the state label a string done. So that looks easy, but it's all, you have to digest this without knowing the structure you get and combining that with the internal model. So the two examples for me is just that I saw that we have backend and frontend, and it's rather complex. And I'm not, I get uneasy when I think about maintaining such a complexity on the front end and on the back end, saying this is nowhere to go. So we have, so the column types, so there's our type system in ActiveGrid. So there needs to be something that needs to know about these types, about the action it can do. You can compose it, the and or filters and stuff. The JSON we do, that every JSON you get from a backend is wrapped in a so-called value tree. What do you mean? It's just that you take one of them, and if you ask what will be your access path, it just gives it to you. So that's one way of integrating that. And there's, of course, application scope. It's different if I'm working on a grid or on a flow instance. That's the term we use for one, because a flow is the definition of the flow, and when you kick it off, you get an instance of a flow, so it's called flow instance. And after some thinking, saying, okay, the normal way of describing this we call DSL usually. You have just a structure, another language of describing your business problem. But then I get unsatisfied because DSLs are often one way. So you describe it in one place, and another place is interpreting it. It's like SQL. You make it at one part, but you never digest SQL. You just create it, send it, and the database creates it. And that was not sufficient. I'm saying, okay, what would be a two-way DSL? And I'm saying, okay, that's a little programming language, actually, a scripting language. So I got off and made a thing which called obviously ActiveScript, which tries to combine all of the problems into syntax, because I'm also a fan of behavior description things. So usually JSON stuff is all state. And if you have something like describing behavior, it's always nicer. So the one thing I did not show is there's a little thing called show filter expression when you did it. And if you open that, you just get the syntax view by drag and dropping and clicking what the syntax is you just created. And there we go. So it's it's a uniform syntax to say that in a flow instance, it's like a scope you have in programming language. So the scope understands step, because I know I'm a flow instance, so step is each execution of a node is a step. So the UI knows exactly the ID of the node, and step I can say, okay, I know which of the node you're meaning. Then I'm going over into the environment of the node, which means every node has an output. That's like a workflow engine. You have inputs and output. Every node has an output. The HTTP node has a data section that has the payload that you get from there, so you can access to that. And then get state is something the user needs to drive, because we don't know what this JSON looks like, but it will be hierarchical, because JSON is either arrays or dictionaries. So you can have, we have add index or get key, and then you can have an access path, just what you will do with XPath or all these hierarchical queries. And if you request the particle in that response, you will get something which has a type as well. It will be a JSON type, but this time you know it's a string, but it doesn't matter. It's just that you're saying you can also acquire is equal to. So that's the thing saying, at that point in the execution, I know this data will come, this user-driven thing I can just program it onto. That's a really nice way of putting it. So it doesn't look very nice, but at least it looks modern, you know, dots and parentheses. Something which we can work on, at least we can compose. So, and we only need for this time the single line expressions. We don't need variables and such. And this is so the same, but then we have the same problem. So if we make that syntax or thingy we can do it on the front end and on the back end. That would be marvelous, because then we just exchange the syntax. But I don't want to maintain these on the front end and the back end. That's still the problem. And the good thing, I don't have to, because we do it in Faro. So there is a descent from the RB parser I made. It's an ActiveScript parser, which works similar. It's just it turns the syntax into all my knowledge I know from JavaScript, that the basic thing is a dot selects a property whenever you get something like a function, and with parentheses you kick off the call with the argument list. So there's nothing magic about that. So we do the parser. You see there below is AS interpreter visitor. So there is an interpreter, there's a parser interpreter, so you have a mini scripting language that enables you to deal with that syntax. And so you can do the same, that's the same expression we had on the slide. You can just click on a workspace and then saying, parse me that expression, and then you get a little AST. So there's function call nodes, property lookups, just like a JavaScript is working. And then you call ActiveScript builder build. And then here, Nuri, this is your slide. And Dave, that's your slide. Yeah, we have Faro.js, which works pretty well. So if you take a bit, you cannot use, I use pragmas and stuff, and I'm saying you cannot do this. So, but there's other ways doing it. So if you don't have to reduce very much, but if you have a clear and simple code like a parser and interpreter, you can just transpile that to JavaScript. So I was saying now we have a full-blown parser and interpreter in Faro, and on the front end, I only need to develop it once, and it will always be the same. So there's a bit of guarantee that we can exchange on the syntax level, and both sides will have the same assumption about complexity. So just to recap, the ActiveScript on the front end is used to that we have, so each of the types in ActiveScript, if you put local properties, so you will get all the methods it understands, so it enables something like auto-completion. But the main part is that we combine the scope thing, the node environment, the grid environment, the types, and everything into a single syntax, and all of them is able to pick visually. So because we didn't write a single character of the expression, and the expression is underneath as a knowledge of the front end, but the user has not to deal with it, because like displaying hierarchically the JSON and someone picking drag and drop, it does exactly what we want. Pick out of the hierarchy the one thing you're interested, and we just make the hierarchy that the little thing telling the whole path to access it, so we can integrate in our own stuff. Nice is also, as we have the parser and the interpreter, all of the expressions we can run on the front end. So when we do something, we can immediately say that the value that it will do, because you just take the ActiveScript, and in each key press you can just parse and execute the expression, so you have the full thing you want to have. And we learned that the core thing we care about is the AST, but the syntax is a really, compressed, or how is this? A little serialization of that AST that we can use for communication back and forth of the server. So if you do then saying, this is my duty like this expression, I just put this in a JSON, just like say expression equals like this, and you send it to the server, which is a replacement for the whole AST. But not enough, because I like to go the full way. Is now to the exciting stuff, is that on the back end, we just reparse the syntax to an AST, and I'm saying, but what do you do on the back end? And I'm saying, if you have this grid and you have a filter, you will have an object that has a filter instance in the database. And well, I unveiled it already. Let's assume you have an object-oriented database, and let's assume the name could be soil. You can just store the AST. It's just objects all along. So you have your business model, and then in the filter, you just another bunch of objects we call AST. So you just store the AST in a database. And then it gets really wild, because if you go to a database, the structure it works is usually that you select will go somewhere in your data as a starting point, and then it will iterating over the next candidate objects. and we'll use the predicates to select. It's in the list, it's not. Select where in SQL will be the where is the predicate, and then you're saying, okay, I kick off from here, and then look, are you satisfying the where clause? Are you satisfying the where clause? And so all that's the same. And now we can use the user-created AST to do exactly the same. So we take every object from the database, and then we run this AST on the object to select it. So we have a transparent handling of the visual-created AST or script down to the database when selecting the next filter. The filter case in the grid would be like this. You open the grid, it loads the AST, and then it checks for every entity, run on the AST, select it, yes, no, and the next. And that's what the database things makes really easy compared to what we had, the quote from Dale. You don't want to send your data to a program. You want to send your program to data, because then you can go through the data and execute a program, and you have always the minimum selection and performant way of getting that. And this is now completely driven by the user. With the railguards, you have a DSL. Well, a DSL is always to enable people, but also to restrict them. So you don't want to do them nasty things. Just like people think people should program Java because there's railguards. You cannot do something really stupid, just stupid things. Yeah. And that's kind of a security that we can say we can funnel from the front end to the database, something we have under control, but which is so freely to express that we don't have to code everything in. Oh, right on time. Yeah, that's. I forgot to switch the slide. That's making it, and the iterator with that as execution is it's not all in place right now. So we just. The experiment is pretty new, but now we're replacing all of the systems all of the parts to use that. So that's already it. So there is still 7 minutes if there's questions. Thank you, by the way.
You store the you stored the AST on the database. Why don't you just transfer the domain-specific language or the text?
The syntax.
Can recompile any time, or is it because you don't want the compiler on the backend? Or
say it again.
Why do you store the AST instead of the source in the database?
Well. Design is about decisions, and that was one. So I could store the syntax, but then I have to parse it every time I access the grid, which is feasible because you have usually a lot of entities checked against the AST and you read the syntax once. But yeah, because I don't care, because I have soil, so I can do a string, but I can also do the AST. And well, there's other ideas why you will want to have the AST in a database, but that's next year. If we come to query planning and stuff, you will have something so this is not the end. This is still the beginning. Because, just as the outlook, because we have a few ideas is that if you have the AST, you can analyze everything. So it's just if you look for select blocks, each as an argument. So what you can figure out is the message sends to that in the AST. And that's actually what makes the query. So if I'm saying I'm looking for all person that the first name is, so each first name, then you know that you're looking for property first name. And then you will have later, so we'll get more indexes. And if you have an index for first name, you can automatically optimize select the index to make that iterator. Because there's one thing to get more performance is to make the iterator on an index and not on the linear scan on the table. And then you analyze the AST to get what you're selecting. That's what in SQL is like select. But that you get from the code. So I'm still in the hope I can provide something taking just the Smalltalk protocol. That you say soil select, block, each, and the rest is done for you, including auto-selecting indexes. Not sure if that's comprehensible, but stay tuned for next year's slide. Yep. Any more questions?
What if you have a string field in the database which actually contains JSON code? Can you work with those fields as well?
You mean refine JSON?
Yeah, well, if you have descriptor in a database field, which is a string object, but actually contains JSON code, and you're looking for a certain field in that JSON code.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but that's application specific. So there should be a way for the database to let you do that. So because it's so it's JSON as string in ActiveScript, we just try to reify all these cases where actually you have a JSON object that you don't lose the context, because if you put JSON into string, it's gone. Yeah. So you have to annotate it anyway, otherwise it will go wrong. So, but the iterator is saying you can still decorate the AST or something. So you can still say, okay, while processing, I know that's a JSON, so I do JSON stuff on top of it. That's all the features we want to have, because Soil is supposed to be a library to enable all of this stuff. But that's a really good question, because I will take that on the list to something about to care. But it's not something you should expect as a feature. You should expect the feature that allows you to do that what you want. So, and yeah, so we're not Postgres, and we don't, well, so we hope that people don't do that, because usually there's not even a lot of sense doing that. Make it JSON as a string, make JSON as a JSON. More question? Oh.
I would like to ask about multi-party.
Can you wait for the microphone, please? Oh, I'm not sure.
So I want to focus more on the visual part, the visual definition, because from what I saw, it's like it looks similar to the Tabarna workflow. I don't know if you have checked it. It's an Apache project, which kind of lets you to visual compose queries and has a ACL time. And I don't know if you have that plan to have be able to import those kind of, because there are hundreds of workflow definitions already implemented in that platform. So do you have plans to support something like that, or is something that you plan to use like in-house?
So the question is, if we are going to support, Savannah was the name?
Tabarna.
If we import that?
If you plan to like importing other from other platforms, because this is a really complex domain of the workflow.
That's easy. The business we drive is customer driven. So we make the base technology and the features are completely customer driven. We only implement what customers are asking. So if there's enough customers that are willing to put enough money, because that's usually the point where it ends, sure, why not? I mean, it's importing something and workflows. I mean, it's not rocket science either. So it's so there's notions. So we have a lazy way, because usually in Flow you have these defined nodes. You can have a single input, single output, and then you have a different node when you don't want that. But there is also this van der Waal. I mean, there's a lot of grammar. So there's van der Waal is one of the big things what you can have in a flow, and there's modifications of that. But there is some kind of core. I think the biggest conflict will be that you can do that. You implement a sub profile of that format, because if it's Apache, I expect it to be. And then you will probably still make the sub grammar or subset. But yeah, everything is here. Most of that stuff is here because people ask for it. Yeah. So thank you very much.